The first time somebody told me they owned rights to my lake, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the idea was so ridiculous my brain refused to process it. Then the guy stepped onto my dock, cracked open a beer, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You might want to move that chair. We got access now, too." And just like that, a quiet Saturday afternoon turned into the beginning of the biggest fight of my life. My name is Ethan Walker, and until all this happened, I figured I knew every inch of Willow Creek Lake. That's what we called it, Willow Creek Lake. My great-grandfather built the dam back in 1936, when this part of Missouri was mostly farmland and gravel roads. Before that, it wasn't a lake at all. It was just a narrow creek winding through a shallow valley. He spent months moving dirt with equipment that would look primitive today, and when the water finally filled in, he left behind something that became part of our family's identity. My grandfather maintained it. My father maintained it. Then eventually it became my responsibility. So when some stranger in a brand new pontoon boat told me he had lake rights, you can understand why I thought maybe he'd had one too many beers before lunch. At first I kept things polite. "Buddy, I think you've got the wrong shoreline." The man smiled. "Nope, we're in Silver Pines now." His wife was sitting in the boat flipping through a glossy brochure. "Private waterfront access," she added. "It's one of the community amenities." I remember looking at her, then looking across the water toward the ridge where dozens of new houses had gone up over the previous 2 years. Silver Pines. That development. I had heard about it, of course. Everybody around here had. Expensive homes, fancy marketing, drone videos, promises of peaceful country living. But something about what she said made my stomach tighten. Private waterfront access. That phrase stuck with me, because there was only one problem. The waterfront belonged to me. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just told them they might want to double-check their paperwork. The husband chuckled. "It's in our mortgage package. We're good." Then he sat down on my dock like we were old friends. I wish I could tell you I immediately knew what was happening, but honestly, I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to convince myself it was some kind of misunderstanding. Then the next morning, I drove down to the boat launch. Our boat launch. And that's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding at all. There were 6 trucks lined up before 8 in the morning. Kayaks, fishing boats, jet skis, families unloading coolers, kids running around, people acting like they'd been coming there for years. For a moment, I just sat in my truck, staring through the windshield. You ever have one of those moments where reality feels slightly off, like somebody quietly rewrote the rules while you weren't paying attention? That's what it felt like. One older gentleman knocked on my window. I rolled it down. "You with the HOA?" he asked. I just stared at him. Then I said, "No, sir. I'm the reason this boat ramp exists." The smile on his face disappeared. Only for a second. Then it came right back. The same look I'd seen on the pontoon owner. The look people get when they think you're confused. I drove home with a knot in my stomach. That night, I pulled every document I could find out of storage. Boxes filled with old property records, survey maps, maintenance permits, tax filings, handwritten notes from my grandfather. The kitchen table disappeared under 80 years of paperwork. My wife, Sarah, walked in around midnight carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You still at it?" I nodded. Something felt wrong, really wrong. And by 2 in the morning, I found the answer. The lake was still entirely private. Every acre, every shoreline section, every recorded filing. The lake bed belonged to my family. The dam belonged to my family. The access roads belonged to my family. No easements, no public access, no shared ownership agreements. Nothing. Legally speaking, ownership was crystal clear, which raised a much bigger question. If Silver Pines didn't own the lake, then why did 70 families believe they did? And sitting there under the kitchen light, staring at those documents spread across the table, I began to realize this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. Because somewhere between the brochures, the sales presentations, and the dream those homeowners had bought into, somebody had convinced an entire community that my family's lake belonged to them. And I had a feeling whoever started that story knew exactly what they were doing. The next few days turned into something that felt less like normal life and more like an investigation. Every spare minute I had was spent digging. I started with the county records office because if there was some document I'd somehow missed, I wanted to find it before somebody else did. What I found only made things stranger. Silver Pines Development never purchased the lake. Not part of it. Not a section of shoreline. Not even a sliver of the lake bed. They bought several hundred acres on the ridge overlooking the water, just enough to give every home a beautiful view. From a real estate perspective, it was brilliant. Every back porch faced the lake. Every sunset reflected off the water. Every listing photo looked like something out of a magazine. But ownership? Nothing. The lake wasn't included. I remember sitting in my truck outside the records office, staring at those documents, thinking there was no way this happened by accident. You don't build a multi-million-dollar development without lawyers. You don't sell 70 homes without title research. You don't somehow forget who owns an entire lake. Somebody knew. The question was who. A week later, I got my answer. A neighbor I'd known for years named Frank stopped by my house carrying a folder. You need to see this. Inside were marketing materials from Silver Pines, beautiful drone photographs, professional videos, website screenshots, and there it was, my dock, my boat ramp, my shoreline, everywhere, not identified as mine, of course, just shown as part of the lifestyle. Families fishing, boats cruising, children swimming, captions talking about exclusive waterfront living and premium lake access. Technically, they never came right out and said residents own the lake. That was the clever part. They didn't have to. The implication did all the work for them. People saw the pictures. People heard the sales pitch. Their brains filled in the blanks. By the time they signed closing papers, most of them probably believed access was guaranteed. The more I thought about it, the less angry I became at the homeowners themselves. Most of them weren't trying to steal anything. They genuinely believed what they'd been told. Unfortunately, belief doesn't magically create property rights. About 2 weeks later, I hired an attorney named Daniel Brooks. Daniel wasn't the kind of lawyer who advertised on billboards. He specialized in water rights, land disputes, and complicated ownership cases. The first thing he did was spend nearly 4 hours reviewing every document I had. The second thing he did was lean back in his chair and smile. Not a big smile, just enough. What? I asked. He shook his head. Ethan, I've been doing this for 23 years. Okay, I don't get to say this very often. My stomach tightened. Say what? You're not just right. He tapped the paperwork. You're extremely right. For the first time in weeks, I felt some relief. Then Daniel said something that immediately took that relief away. This isn't going to matter emotionally. What do you mean? I mean you're legally right. The problem is there are 70 families who believe you're wrong. And he wasn't kidding. Things escalated fast. The weekends got worse. Boats everywhere. People tying up at the dock. Jet skis cutting across areas we'd always treated as private. One afternoon, I found a family having lunch at a picnic table my father built 20 years ago. The father waved at me. Friendly. Completely unaware. Beautiful property you've got here. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I didn't know what else to do. That same evening, Daniel called. We're sending notices. Within 48 hours, certified letters went out to the HOA board, their management company, and the development corporation itself. Simple language. Simple facts. The lake was privately owned. The dock was privately owned. The launch ramp was privately owned. Any unauthorized use constituted trespassing. Access was revoked immediately. Then came the part everybody remembers. The chain. A heavy industrial chain. I drove down to the boat ramp early Saturday morning before sunrise. The lake was perfectly still. Mist drifting across the water. Birds moving through the trees. For a minute, I just stood there looking at it. My grandfather used to bring me here before daylight. We'd sit on that dock and wait for the fish to start biting. I could still hear his voice sometimes when I stood there long enough. And that's when I realized something. I wasn't protecting property. I was protecting responsibility. People love ownership. Nobody talks about maintenance. Nobody talks about liability. Nobody talks about rebuilding spillways after storms or repairing erosion or carrying insurance policies for a dam nearly 90 years old. My family had done all of that, generation after generation. I wrapped the chain around the gate, locked it, posted 3 signs. Private property. No unauthorized access. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Then I drove home. The silence lasted maybe 24 hours. After that, all hell broke loose. Emails flooded in. Phone calls. Voicemails. People showing up at my gate. Some were confused. Some were angry. A few were furious. One man stood outside my fence yelling for almost 15 minutes. You can't take away something we paid for. I stayed calm. I didn't sell it to you. That only made him angrier. Another homeowner accused me of trying to extort the community. A woman told me I was destroying children's memories. One couple claimed I'd deliberately waited until after they moved in, as if I'd somehow orchestrated the entire thing. The strange part was watching myself slowly become the villain. In their version of the story, I wasn't the property owner. I was the greedy guy refusing to share, the guy ruining summer, the guy standing between families and the dream they'd purchased. And when enough people repeat the same story, it starts to feel real, even when it isn't. Then things got personal. One evening, I came out of a grocery store and found all 4 tires on my truck slashed. No cameras, no witnesses, nothing. A week later, Sarah answered a block call. Nobody spoke at first, just breathing. Then a man's voice, low and calm. You're going to regret this. Click. The line went dead. That was the moment everything changed. Because before that, it had been stressful. After that, it became dangerous. Sarah stopped feeling comfortable home alone. Our kids started noticing the tension. Neighbors we'd known for years suddenly avoided eye contact. People stopped waving. Invitations disappeared. And some nights, sitting alone on the porch overlooking the lake, I'd honestly wonder if fighting was worth it. Maybe I should just give in. Maybe I should unlock the gate. Maybe peace was worth more than being right. Then I'd look out across the water and remember my grandfather standing on that dam with a shovel over his shoulder. And every time the same thought came back. If I surrendered this because people were angry, what exactly had all those generations been protecting it for? What I didn't know yet was that the real fight hadn't even started. Because about 3 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived from the HOA's attorneys. And the moment I saw the return address, I knew we were heading to court. And the moment I saw the return address, I knew we were heading to court. I won't lie to you. Even after everything Daniel had told me, seeing those legal papers still hit like a punch to the chest. There's something about being sued that makes you question reality for a second. You can have the facts. You can have the documents. You can have decades of history behind you. None of that changes the feeling you get when somebody officially accuses you of being the problem. The HOA's argument was exactly what you'd expect. Residents had purchased homes believing lake access was included. The development had promoted a waterfront lifestyle. Families had relied on those representations. Removing access now caused financial and personal harm. On the surface, it sounded pretty convincing. Honestly, if I'd been one of those homeowners, I probably would have been angry too. That's what made the whole thing so complicated. Nobody was fighting over what existed. They were fighting over what they believed existed. The courtroom itself was smaller than most people would imagine. No dramatic television moments. No surprise witnesses crashing through doors. Just lawyers, paperwork, and a judge who looked like he'd seen every kind of nonsense a property dispute could produce. The HOA attorney spoke first. For nearly an hour, he talked about community expectations, homeowner reliance, and the representations made during property sales. I watched several residents sitting behind him. Some looked hopeful. Some looked nervous. A few looked directly at me with enough frustration to melt steel. Then Daniel stood up, calm, relaxed, almost bored, which, as I learned over time, was usually a bad sign for the other side. He walked through the chain of title, the property records, the ownership history, the surveys, the permits, every single document, one by one, methodically. There was no drama in it, just facts. And facts have a strange way of draining emotion out of a room. Finally, the HOA attorney pointed toward one of the brochures, a glossy photograph of the lake, the same photograph that had probably sold dozens of homes. He argued that residents had reasonably relied upon the representations presented to them. Daniel nodded. Then he stepped forward. Your Honor, he said, a brochure is not a deed, and a photograph is not an easement. The room went completely silent. Even now I remember that moment. Not because it was theatrical, because it was simple. Everybody in that courtroom suddenly understood what the case was really about. The judge looked down at the documents in front of him, turned a few pages, adjusted his glasses, then looked up. The court agrees. That was it. No dramatic pause, no suspense, no leng si deliberación. The complaint was dismissed. Just like that. Months of tension collapsed in a matter of minutes. I remember letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But then the judge added one more thing. And that single comment changed everything. If there has been misrepresentation regarding property access, the proper dispute may exist between the homeowners and the developer. You could practically hear gears turning throughout the courtroom. For the first time, people stopped looking at me and started looking somewhere else. The target had shifted. Over the following months, the HOA and several homeowners filed actions against the development company. I wasn't involved. Didn't want to be involved. Had no interest in being involved. I'd already spent enough time and money defending something that never should have been questioned in the first place. So I went back to normal life. Or at least I tried to. The lake became quiet again. The dock sat empty. The boat ramp stayed locked. Summer came and went. Then one afternoon, roughly 6 months later, I received a phone call I never expected. It was the HOA president. A different one. The board had changed significantly after the lawsuit. His voice sounded tired. Not angry, just tired. Would you be willing to meet with us? I almost said no. Part of me wanted to. Part of me felt they had earned the consequences. But another part of me remembered that most of these people weren't villains. They'd simply trusted the wrong people. So I agreed. The meeting took place in a small conference room at a local bank. No hostility, no accusations, just reality. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, everybody seemed to be working from the same set of facts. One board member finally said what nobody had been willing to say before. We understand now that the lake belongs to you. Simple sentence. Took nearly 2 years to get there. Then they asked the question that changed the ending of this story. Is there any way we can work something out? The truth is, I'd already been thinking about that. Not because I needed the money, and not because I felt pressured, but because I genuinely liked seeing families enjoy the water. What bothered me was never the people. It was the lie. So we spent months negotiating. Carefully. Everything documented. Everything reviewed. Everything crystal clear. No assumptions. No marketing language. No hidden expectations. Eventually we reached an agreement. A 20-year lease. Residents could access designated portions of the lake through controlled entry points. Annual fees would help cover maintenance and insurance costs. The HOA would contribute toward infrastructure upkeep. And most importantly, ownership remained unchanged. The dam stayed under my control. Safety decisions stayed under my control. Maintenance authority stayed under my control. Everybody understood exactly where they stood, the way it should have been from the beginning. Today, if you visit Willow Creek Lake on a summer afternoon, you'd never know any of this happened. Kids jump off docks. Families fish from boats. Neighbors wave at each other across the water. The same homeowners who once viewed me as the enemy now stop and chat when they see me. Some have even become friends. Life has a strange sense of humor that way. Every January, a payment arrives from the HOA. Every year, I deposit the check. And every year, I think about how close all of this came to ending differently. Because here's the part that sticks with me. The real danger was never the lawsuit. It wasn't the threats. It wasn't even the conflict. The real danger was assumption. An entire community built a belief around something nobody bothered to verify. And once enough people believed it, the belief started feeling stronger than the truth itself. That's a lesson that goes way beyond property lines and lake access. It applies to contracts, business, friendships, communities, maybe even life itself. Just because everybody says something is true doesn't make it true. Sometimes the paperwork matters. Sometimes the details matter. Sometimes the boring facts are the only things standing between order and chaos. And if you're the person holding those facts when everybody else believes something different, you're probably not going to be popular. Trust me, I learned that firsthand. But here's the question I've wondered ever since. If you were standing where I stood, would you have done the same thing? Would you have locked the gate, endured the threats, fought the lawsuit, and risked becoming the villain in everyone else's story? Or would you have opened the lake and avoided the conflict altogether? I'm genuinely curious where you land on that, because depending on who you ask, I'm either the guy who protected his family's legacy or the guy who almost took away a community's dream. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you've ever been caught in a situation where the truth and public opinion were pulling in opposite directions, I'd love to hear that story too. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't about who's right or wrong. They're about how much you're willing to endure after you've already proven it.